Club Sports, and we are looking forward to a very entertaining race once it gets underway. Now, we have had a lot of fog this morning, so the race start time put back. There has been talk of it being a safety car start. We have yet to have that confirmed. The cars are behind the safety car for the moment. This might be a formation lap before a further one that counts into the 20 minutes, and we are 20 minutes rather than 25, which was the original distance, because of the timetable having already rather fallen apart. And as you know, we are a bit limited on light at this time of year. On the positive side, it's not raining, and even more positive is the fact that we've got lots of new drivers coming into the series this weekend. Some can score points, not all. The champion-elect is James Dorlin, who lines up second on the grid. His main opposition, Tom Jackson, not here because of damage sustained at Croft, and unfortunately the budget doesn't quite stretch to a full rebuild of what was a very badly damaged car. It is the full Grand Prix circuit in use. Fabulous circuit, the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit, and when we do go racing, this promises to be very good indeed. Dino Zamparelli, a non-point scoring guest on pole position, taking over Archie Hamilton's car, Archie having hurt his back in a track day incident during the week. David Addison with Andy McEwen, trackside, peering through the fog. Andy, looking for a Porsche, but also looking forward to a great race.
Yeah, I think so. I think this Grand Prix circuit at Silverstone is really going to suit these cars, and as you made the point, it's, I think, the biggest grid of the year, this first season of racing for the Cayman Islands Porsche Sprint Challenge GB. And what better place to round it all out than the iconic Silverstone Grand Prix circuit? We can't see a huge amount of it at the moment. Certainly the view down the Hanger Straight was less than ideal, but the rule is generally, as long as one marshal's post can see the next one, then we are good to go racing, and that appears to be the case. So, yeah, looking forward to this. More or less a dry circuit, I think, a big grid of cars, and with the championships now pretty much settled, they can just go racing.
Indeed, yeah. The AMS has been won. It was won at Croft by Ambrosio Perfetti, who was quite lucky, actually, because he got involved in the accident with Tom Jackson that stopped the race. He ended up starting from the pit lane with a bit of damage incurred, but he survived to win the class and therefore take the points to win the class in the championship. With Tom Jackson not here, James Dorlin basically has to be 6 points ahead of Theo Edgerton by the end of this race to win it. But Theo Edgerton, if he were to win, would basically need to win both, and James Dorlin pretty much not finish either of the two races because it is that big a margin between the two. Now, the cars have just completed one lap behind the safety car, but still slightly quirkily, the clock has not yet started. So the clock ticks on by, or should tick on down, but for the moment, all of these laps count as presumably extra formation laps. Dino Zamparelli on pole position, then he doesn't score points. James Dorlin, champion-elect, with him on the front row, in quotes. 6 times a winner this year. You get a point for pole position as well within the championship that effectively will go James Dorlin's way. This is how they are in the order. James Dorlin second to Dino Zamparelli on the grid. Theo Edgerton is the driver that will line up third, with Charlie Liddell starting fourth, another of the newcomers, 2 years ago Ginetta Super Cup champion. Fifth on the grid, Ian Humphries, heading the AM class, ahead of another of the newcomers, Adam Knight, who's switched from Carrera Cup GB, in which he's raced in the past. Daniel O'Brien is another newcomer. Ambrosio Perfetti is the AM champion, ahead of Mike Price, welcome back to the series because he missed Croft. And Peter Chambers, who also missed the second Croft race with an engine drama, he is on the grid as well. Carl Cavers starts 11th, ahead of John Westbrook, with next up Nigel Rice, and then another of the debutants, Charles March, the Earl of March and Kinrara, Charlie March for Team Parker Racing, new team into the championship ahead of Simon Green, who is next. The Russian driver Andrei Borodin will start 16th, and Charles Clark, there he is, he's at the back of the grid, a driver that's raced in the Porsche Club of Great Britain's club level championship, now stepping up to the rather more powerful Caymans. So, as I say, the clock still has 20 minutes on it rather than 25. It could be that they get these 2 warming up laps and straight into the race, but information about the start process here is all something of a step into the unknown. But track conditions are most definitely improving, and marshals are now on the grid, so the initial aim, I think, of the safety car start has been superseded by 2 green flag laps, which is possibly another reason why we've dropped 5 minutes, but it will be the conventional start after all. So that is now the plan, which is good, Andy, because it's a proper start, and it means that you can gain ground and you can lose ground off that standing start.
Yeah, that run into Copse Corner is always important, isn't it? It's quite tricky to go in there on the tight inside line, so sometimes pole position is not always the place to be here, especially if it's a bit damper offline. There is, I think, a little bit of moisture out there. It's certainly not a wet circuit, but it may be a bit greasy. The tyres will be cold even after these couple of relatively sedate warm-up laps that they've had. It is November at Silverstone. After all, it's not going to be that easy to find the grip out there. But yeah, that inside line into Copse can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. Dino Zamparelli, of course, I don't know if he's ever had a standing start in one of these things before, in what little testing he's had in them. So how he gets...
is probably about it, isn't
exactly,
it?
Yeah. So how he gets off the line could be interesting. And James Dorlin, knowing that all he really has to do is finish, how hard is he willing to push to take advantage of Dino's relative lack of experience in these cars? But of course, Dino Zamparelli, a very experienced driver, and he's had a fair bit of success in Porsches in recent years as well. He
has indeed. He was on target to win Carrera Cup GB 2 years, missed out both, sadly, but a very handy racer. He has also, of course, raced a 718 Cayman in British GT, hasn't he, in the past, for his car. So again, standing start out of the pit lane only. He doesn't score points, don't forget, as well. So a further complication, if you like, to all of this is that where James Dorlin finishes, if he's behind Zamparelli, he'll get more points anyway, because they will be distributed for the scorers. So second on the road to Zamparelli would still be a race win. The Silverstone track surface these days, people tell me, holds on to the moisture more than the old track surface did. So chilly morning, damp circuit, and it might still be a real test over the first couple of laps. Two classes then, the pros and the AMs. You've got all these guest drivers that aren't scoring points. We'll worry about those as the race unwinds. These cars, 3.8 litre, 6-cylinder, 425 brake horsepower. They weigh 400 kilos. They are good for the pros, as good in a user-friendly way for the AMs. We've got some good battles to look forward to, and it is the penultimate round of an all-new championship for 2020. The Cayman Islands Porsche Sprint Challenge GB. Race 1 is about to get underway. 20 minutes it will be. Green flag at the back says everybody is where they need to be. The lights go red, the lights go out. Good start by Zamparelli. Not a great start by James Dorlin, in fact. And Theo Edgerton from the second row tries to get up alongside him, and he does so, goes round the outside, and also they're having a go, number 9, Charlie Laydell, the former Ginetta Super Cup champion. So Dorlin is fourth, as Mayhem behind, because we've got one in the gravel already. And that, I'm afraid, is Adam Knight, whose first outing in one of these cars has not lasted terribly long, but as the cars now wriggle their way up through the Beckett's S's for the first time. James Dorlin there looking almost content to give away places, Andy. Keep out of trouble, as Theo Edgerton has now taken over the race lead, and Dorlin not risking anything yet, just now starting to mount that attack, but he wants points here, not heroics. Driving over the curb there, going out onto the hanger straight, was a tad risky though, but he had no choice because Edgerton in front of him was so slow off the corner. Dorlin had a head of speed and has been able to drag through into third, and now thinks about, in fact does more than think about, he goes for the inside line into the right-hander at Stowe Corner and tries to take second place away from Dino Zamparelli. There's contact further back. That's Ambrogio Perfetti getting tagged sideways and quite fortunate not to end up pointing completely the wrong way. A lively first lap, David. We thought this might be the case. It's damper out there than I thought, actually, especially through Maggots and Beckett's. And out here at Club, we can see the spray being kicked up by the cars, especially offline. And I think that is catching one or two out. Just wonder what they've done in terms of a tyre for this, whether it's a slick or a wet. One driver shown as being on an outlap, John Westbrook, who therefore started from the pit lane, so maybe that was a late choice of tyre. Dino Zamparelli, then the pole position driver, has dropped back, as we have seen. James Dorlin getting up ahead of him, but the road certainly is cold, it's certainly damp, it's certainly not giving a lot of traction. Even yesterday in GT qualifying at the end of the day, about 3 o'clock, drivers were saying how long it was taking to turn on tyres. Now that's a different tyre constructor, admittedly, but Theo Edgerton, who's got nothing to lose here, he's very much the outsider for the championship. He's doing his level best to get away up front, isn't he? James Dorlin then has wriggled his way into second place, but look, as they run wide onto the curb, suddenly there's a bit of spray being generated there, so this is a long way from being a dry road. And look at the way they're weaving offline down the Wellington Straight. That tells me they're on wet tyres, and they're concerned that those wet tyres might start overheating. Even though the race has been shortened by 5 minutes, they clearly feel that the road is dry enough that in another 15 minutes time the tyres may not be at their best. Look at who is in 5th place, by the way, and going with the leaders. Ian Humphries is the AM class leader. In theory, we wouldn't expect him to be able to run with the pace of the leading 4, but he is very much with them as they come across the line at the end of lap 1. Really impressive first lap that. He has a lot more confidence in these conditions than you would perhaps expect from an AM driver. Absolutely right. So again, is that down to a good choice of tyre? We've got one driver heading to the pit lane, which looks like it might be Perfetti. It is. Ambrogio Perfetti pits as the leaders go out of Copse, where there was that yellow flag for Adam Knight's car that was stranded. But Theo Edgerton leading then at the end of lap 1 by 9/10 of a second from James Dorlin in second place. Third is Dino Zamparelli. There is Ambrosio Perfetti, the AM champ, and in he comes. And now we'll try to sort out the damage, maybe even have a thought about a tyre choice in all of that.
Yeah, possibly, I suppose. Now's the chance if you want to try and take a gamble on tyres. I think slick tyres will be quicker by the end, but it is only a short race, and I don't know how quickly they can change those tyres in the pit lane, but we shall see what he does. Of course, Adam Knight never made it to the end of lap 1, so we're already down to 15 cars circulating. There's a hope that Perfetti will get back out there, as here we see some of our leading AM drivers. That's Mike Price, who is running 9th overall, 5th in the AM class, but trying to find a way past Nigel Rice, who started a few spots behind him on the grid. He clearly was able to benefit out of the early race shuffle, defends the inside line as they drop down into the left through the double apex right-hander at Club Corner, and Nigel Rice doesn't look quite as quick as the green machine behind, but it's hard to pass in these conditions because there will be a slightly drier line, the racing line, and to overtake someone you have to go off that onto the wetter side of the road. Even on wet tyres, that will yield significantly less grip than you like.
John Westbrook was shown on that first lap as having left from the pit lane, and yet he came through in 12th place. Now that is a pretty remarkable first lap, which makes me wonder, certainly if he is on the right tyre for the conditions, what everybody else is on. The obvious thing is to suggest that you start on a wet, but I do wonder, even though we've seen them weaving, whether the leaders are on slicks and hoping that the road dries out sufficiently. Now that doesn't explain why they might go to the wetter part, but it does seem, and this tallies with the AMs, doesn't it? Ian Humphries, John Westbrook pushing really hard with that better confidence. The leaders are coming up through Luffield then, ready to complete lap 2. James Dorlin going out wide through Luffield, where often you find a bit more traction there near the motorbike penalty line. So coming up towards the end of the lap, and it's Theo Edgerton, who is still well clear in the race lead. Dorlin is second. Third is Dino Zamparelli, but of course he doesn't score points. Fourth is Charlie Laydell, who is another non-scorer. Ian Humphries fifth, but he's dropping back a little bit.
Yeah, 2.5 seconds back, wasn't it, at the start of this lap? Carl Cavers, by the way, second in AM, but about 5 seconds behind him. So although Humphries isn't quite matching the leaders at this stage, he is doing more than enough to hang on to the AM class victory as the leading group heads through Beckett's. There you can see the lead that Edgerton has. Fastest lap that time on the first full flying lap, a 2:22.705, and that was a good 4.5 tenths or so quicker than James Dorlin. The battle really is for third. Charlie Liddell, who has a fair bit of experience of one-make sports car and GT championships, but it's the first time I think we've seen him in the Porsche, and he is really challenging Zamparelli now as they head towards Stowe.
It's interesting, isn't it, that somebody, both of them newcomers to the cars in this championship, but Dino, a very experienced Porsche peddler, goes out a little bit wide there. Charlie Liddell thrown in at the deep end, you could argue, new to the car, new to the championship, but he's taking the fight to Dino as they come now down towards the end of Vale. Dino writes about Porsches as well as races them, comes up to Club Corner. They're on the tail of Dorlin. Just to tidy up the John Westbrook point, incidentally, he didn't start from the pit. Somehow he managed to trigger the pit out loop, but he did start on the grid. So he is in 11th place and did start from the grid. Ambrosio Perfetti, that we saw pit, has rejoined, and there is James Dorlin, who is still quite busy trying to fend off the challenge of Dino Zamparelli. But what he's not really being able to do at the moment is close up much on Edgerton, who is still the race leader. And he's building that lead because Dorlin is so busy defending, and he doesn't need to because these aren't point scorers, that it's actually allowing Edgerton to build that race lead, isn't it?
Well, it looked as though Dorlin was getting away from this pair at the start of the lap, but then something happened through Stowe and Club because he suddenly lost several car lengths to them. Good exit there onto the Wellington straight for Charlie Liddell in fourth, and then they all dive for the wetter side of the road underneath the bridge into this tricky braking zone at Brooklands. The corner really tightens through the second half, and you've got to have the front end of the car biting into the tarmac well in order to reach that apex. Dorlin was a little wide of it. That puts him on the curb coming out of the corner. Then he runs out wide, probably deliberately through Luffield to try and find some grip, but that does rather invitingly leave that inside line open for Zamparelli to stick his nose in there as he got the overlap through Woodcote. Not quite, but James Dorlin doesn't dare turn across his bows. Contact there would put Dorlin in the wall, out of the race, possibly jeopardise his chances of getting out in race 2. He does not need that, so Zamparelli and Liddell can really use that to their advantage here. If they're thinking about it, which I'm sure they are, they will know that Dorlin might not fight them as hard as some others would.
Absolutely right, and of course James Dorlin, by staying on the outside line, always had that slight advantage last time, a little bit more grip, finds the wet patch there, diving into Beckett's, but these three as one. And Theo Edgerton, who's not yet had a win this year, started third on the grid, trying to make good his escape. He was 2 seconds clear at the end of the previous lap. We've got 12 minutes to go, lap time at the moment is a long one. It's a 2:22. You forget just how long the Grand Prix circuit here is, of course. Silverstone is 3.6 miles long, as now Liddell comes up to have a go at Zamparelli. James Dorlin, who needs the points, needs to keep out of trouble, but on the basis that he ain't going to catch Edgerton on this evidence, and those two behind him can't score points, just let them go. Let them get past you, let them have their battle, and bang the points. All right, you might have to go to race 2 to win the championship, but even so, James Dorlin does not need to be involved in this fight, and okay, yes, he wants the best position he can get, and he'd like to perhaps be as close to Edgerton in case Theo falls off the road and he can inherit the win, but to play it safe, let those two go and just take the points.
Yeah, exactly. And James Dorlin's been in this position before, hasn't he? Back when he was racing in the Renault UK Clio Cup, he was a championship contender going into the final round, and it all kind of got away from him towards the end of the season, and he will not want that to happen, especially, as you quite rightly say, when he's battling people he doesn't need to be racing. But these are racing drivers. This is the last race, or the last pair of races that many of them will do this year. They want to end the season on a high, and for James Dorlin's career, it will no doubt mean something if he can beat Dino Zamparelli, who is a bit of a Porsche specialist these days, in a race at Silverstone. So you won't want to let Dino through. Replay of the start, and is that Westbrook having a really good start from towards the back of the field? I think it might have been diving to the middle of the field. That perhaps explains why he gained so many places. Terrible start, though, as you can see, for Mike Price, who, by the way, has just lost another place in the AM category to Daniel O'Brien.
And also Charles Clark, who never got away at all at the back. He was very, very badly delayed. Now, how did Adam Knight end up in the gravel? He's the black car. Ambrosio Perfetti was on the inside of him, so that might explain. There at the end of the lap, Charlie Liddell comes up all over the curb at Wood, trying to get alongside Dino Zamparelli, but he can't do it. Dino now goes to the inside of the road to try to defend. Theo Edgerton's advantage is up to 2.5 seconds. James Dorlin second as we get to the halfway point. Third is the white car run by Redline Racing, Simon Leonard's team, in the hands of Dino Zamparelli. You've got Charlie Liddell running fourth then in the white and orange colours now as the cars accelerate once more up toward the Beckett's S's. Dorlin just cannot get away though, can he?
No, which is odd, really, because the other two are kind of tripping over themselves, aren't they? Zamparelli and Liddell. You would expect that to give Dorlin a little bit of an edge. Now, this could be setup, of course. It might be that they went for a drier or wetter setup than the others, and one setup is working better than the rest, perhaps. There is Ian Humphries, who is leading the AM class still. His lead in the AM class is pretty stable, still 5.7 seconds that he's got over Carl Cavers in second, and third position for Pete Chambers, who started a little way down the order. He's made some good progress. So that is your AM podium. The majority of the field here this weekend, in fact, are AM drivers, just 4 pros, and they are locking out the top 4 positions, and 3 of them absolutely locked in combat still.
Absolutely so, but they're good pros, and Liddell gets up the inside of the squirming car of Zamparelli, who was fighting for traction, and through goes Charlie Liddell. Good move that, found the grip out of the corner, and you saw what a handful it suddenly became for Dino Zamparelli. If you're just a little bit keen with the throttle, the car can get all lively underneath you, and Dino Zamparelli had to try and check the car's pace, get it hustled through Club Corner, which he did, but lost that place to Liddell. And now Charlie Liddell comes up to have a go at James Dorlin. A word about James as well, because not only is he having to race this car, sounds like an imposition, but he's got 2 races in this. He's also got British GT to worry about today in an Aston Martin, so he's having to work out the nuances of 2 different cars across the race meeting. They're both effectively GT4 cars, but 2 very different brands, one with a co-driver, one going solo, and importantly here, a championship to win, and he's edging towards it as he comes down towards Brooklands. The road is drying, but it's still at this awkward place, Andy, of neither being wet nor dry. It's not even damp, I wouldn't suggest. It's just greasy right now.
Yeah, I mean, they are getting quicker. About half the field set personal best laps last time around, so conditions seem to be improving. I do think I might be worth a gamble on slick tyres at the start of the race, but I don't think anyone has gone for that choice. But yeah, you're absolutely right, because it's cold and there isn't really much wind here today either. It's going to take a while now for this last bit of moisture to burn off the circuit, and obviously no sun has penetrated the pretty thick fog that we had lingering over the circuit this morning either to help with that, so
exactly.
It might stay this way for some time.
Nigel Rice you just saw going through, the Yorkshireman in 8th place, another of the AMs. There's Pete Chambers, the septuagenarian, Pete, who started off in the 1970s in hot rod racing, and has been busy over the years in Porsches, Eurocar, historic saloons, you name it. Normally with the Jordan Racing team, Mike Jordan's eponymous team, but at 72 years of age, Pete is enthusiastic as ever. He's had an AM win this year, and there is Theo Edgerton, the race leader, turning his way into Stoke Corner. Theo is one of the many graduates of the Ginetta Junior Championship, but he didn't really sparkle in that, to be fair, last year. He only got one podium, but he does seem to have developed over the course of this season into a very competitive Porsche racer, and this, undoubtedly the best we've seen of him all year, helped in part, of course, by the fact that James Dorlin is rather busy for Into Racing, defending the Rob Boston racing car of Charlie Liddell behind him. And again, Liddell's got good speed into Club Corner. This time, though, he got a face full of Dorlin and couldn't find the gap.
That's the part of the circuit that Liddell is really quick at, and it's also the part of the circuit where Dorlin seems to struggle the most. Dorlin is really being aggressive in this defence now, isn't he? Not necessarily doing anything wrong, but it is a tad unnecessary to be forcing Liddell towards the pit wall there, past the Silverstone wing, on the international part of the Grand Prix circuit here. Dorlin has made it perfectly clear that he is not going to roll over and let these two through, so Liddell is going to have to fight him for it, but this can so easily go wrong. And the point we're making here is that with Edgerton leading the way, Edgerton being Dorlin's nearest championship rival, Dorlin cannot afford an accident. If he has an accident, it's a relatively short turnaround between the two races as well, because of this condensed day, even more so now after the delayed start to the day. He has to keep it clean, and that there was another example of how, by trying to close the door down the back straight towards Abbey Corner, it can so easily go wrong in a heartbeat.
It can indeed. Just trying to do some maths as well to work out whether James Dorlin is going to be can win the championship in this. I think by being outscored, it just notionally nudges it to the next race. But even so, Theo Edgerton will have to work oh so hard in that, need James Dorlin not to finish. So he's as good as the champion, but Theo Edgerton is determined to score a race win. Now, of course, James Dorlin hanging on to that second place. He's a long way back. We were talking earlier of a gap of getting on for 2 seconds. Well, now it's over 4. Nigel Rice, in the meantime, is busy now squabbling in this battle pack with Carl Cavers, and also with there, look, 55, another newcomer, Daniel O'Brien. So the battle for 8th place going over the timing line. But ahead of them is the new 7th place man, Nigel Rice. Up into 8th goes O'Brien. Down to 9th is gaming programmer Carl Cavers. Daniel O'Brien, whose brother is in the British GT race, Conor O'Brien, later on in the day. He's another newcomer to the championship and going very nicely. And Nigel Rice then, 7th. He's another driver that's been racing Porsches on and off for decades. Dorlin under attack again. Charlie Liddell, interestingly, having got himself up past Zamparelli, has pulled away, even though he's got a bit stuck behind Dorlin. Zamparelli might have a problem here, Andy, because he's falling back. Liddell all over the back of Dorlin like a cheap suit as they get to the bottom of Vale, but Zamparelli's pace is ebbing away.
Maybe his tyres are perhaps struggling a little more. Again, not done as much race mileage in this car, but here comes Liddell at his part of the circuit. Dorlin does not want to be closing the door here. That was really, really close. They so nearly made contact through the second part of Club, but now, finally, Liddell has the inside line for Abbey. Even now, though, Dorlin is squeezing him, trying to put him offline into the very quick right-hander. Can he hang tough around the outside? No, he cannot. Charlie Liddell, then, at long last, breaks through the defences of James Dorlin, who tries to come back up the inside into Village. Well, we've said it a million times already in this race, it seems. I'm amazed how feisty Dorlin is being here. Having lost the place, he could be forgiven now for thinking, OK, I'm still third, that's still net second, because these two aren't scoring points. But not only was he being robust in his defence of Liddell, he now was being fairly robust in his attempts to get back through.
But can I refer the honourable gentleman to a point he made some moments ago? These are racing drivers. So, yes, James Dorlin, now he's got his race face on, does not want to give up without a fight. That little squabble has also brought Dino Zamparelli a little bit closer to them. He's not back onto the tail of James Dorlin yet, but he's certainly a lot nearer to them as they come up to Luffield. You look at the line, you think that's an odd line, but it's got more grip on the outside in these wet conditions. So the race leader, Theo Edgerton, having the race of his season, goes through well clear up front. 2nd and 3rd and 4th then. Now Liddell ahead of Dorlin, Zamparelli 4th, and Charlie Liddell with a really good debut in these cars. Now look at the clock, 3 minutes and change. A flying lap is a 2:21. 2 laps to go. There's this, and they'll just be able to eke out 1 more. So 2 more laps to run here at Silverstone.
Yes, not good for anybody who's starting to run out of tyres, and possibly Dino Zamparelli, you would argue, is one of those. He was way wide there going through Beckett's as the car just doesn't look like it wants to turn. Dorlin not being dropped here by Liddell, is he? Liddell, having gone through, is not really escaping from our championship leader. But Dorlin, I'm not sure, is quite close enough, although with a bit of a slipstream down the Hanger Straight, he might be able to have a pop into Stowe Corner. But Charlie Liddell now wants to just get his head down. His first sector is nearly 2/10 quicker than the race leader, Theo Edgerton. He doesn't have time to catch Edgerton, I don't think, unless Theo runs into some major dramas. But that also means that he was a 10th or so quicker than Dorlin, so the gap is now just starting to extend. Still Ian Humphries leading in Am, by the way, 5th place overall from Pete Chambers. But that battle we were watching before between Nigel Rice, O'Brien and Carl Cavers, that was for a podium spot. So Nigel Rice getting himself into 3rd place now within the Am class, and is, well, I was about to say pulling away. He's not. He and O'Brien are still tied together, so still podium places in both classes up for grabs.
Zamparelli again looks starting to fall back. There is the Am leader, so that's Ian Humphries coming into Club Corner. He has had an Am victory this year, but second in the championship. That's where he's going to end up now, to Ambrogio Perfetti. But Ian Humphries deserves a lot of credit for not only the drive that he's had, but a good qualifying, because he was 5th on the grid. So much of the hard work was done early on in the weekend in that qualifying session, as he goes now up through Abbey, the 45-year-old who's come from the Britcar Endurance Championship. There is Dino Zamparelli then for Redline Racing. Dino, very experienced Porsche campaigner. He's raced Cayman GT4s within the British GT Championship. He's been doing lots of driver coaching with quite a handful of the contingent this year. Gets behind the wheel of Archie Hamilton's regular mount, and a driving standards flag is going the way of Dino Zamparelli then. So for track limit abuse, potentially, we've not really seen him doing much of that, but Zamparelli is being given that warning flag. The race leader is about to go onto his last lap then. Through now goes Theo Edgerton. There is Dino Zamparelli, but he's not, for my money, drawn attention to himself by being way out wide over the curbs.
I've noticed him running wide a couple of times, going out onto the Wellington Straight, but I don't think it's through choice. I just don't think the car's got the grip anymore. He's run out of tyres and it's understeer city now. You can see the way he's dropped away from Liddell and Dorlin, so it's possible that he has been doing it, but I don't think he's been gaining any advantage from it. Still, rule is a rule. If you're going over those white lines, then you will be warned, and ultimately you can have time added onto your race. Edgerton, by the way, I don't think there's been a single one of the 8 laps he's completed that hasn't been a new fastest lap. We're now down into the low 2-minute 21s, a 2:21.337, but he was pretty much matched by Liddell, so it's a shame in a way that Charlie couldn't have got into 2nd place earlier and maybe gone with Theo Edgerton. Certainly good news for Edgerton and his slim championship hopes that he's trying to hang on to, but Edgerton versus Liddell I think could have been quite a spicy battle.
Well, we have that to look forward to in race 2, certainly. Theo Edgerton then coming now down to the end of Vale. This car run by Total Control Racing, which is another team that has come into Porsche racing through Sprint Challenge. Talked about new drivers. Well, you know, there are new teams to perhaps break the normal monopoly of the likes of Redline, Team Parker Racing, which has now joined Sprint Challenge, but one of the top Carrera Cup GB teams. There, diving down towards Stowe, Nigel Rice trying to keep Daniel O'Brien at bay. But for Lee Brooks' TCR, Total Control Racing team, Theo Edgerton is edging closer and closer to a race win. At the end of Vale, Nigel Rice comes under renewed attack from Daniel O'Brien. First time out in the championship. Nigel Rice goes a little bit deep there, and the gap should open up for O'Brien on the inside at Club, which it does. Has he got the traction? No. Easily answered that, so he slithers his way back in behind. Pete Chambers' car is the one just up the road. Pete Chambers running in 6th place. The Am champ, incidentally, Ambrogio Perfetti, has only just gone on to his last lap, delayed after contact and a half spin and a pit stop earlier on in the race. But Theo Edgerton is about to make his way up out of Luffield. There he is, and it's going to be a maiden victory for him in the Porsche Sprint Challenge GB. James Dorlin is going to be the second of the scorers, which gets him pretty much to one hand on the championship trophy. But Theo Edgerton takes a maiden victory and does so in style. Brilliant drive. Theo Edgerton wins. Second is the newcomer Charlie Liddell. Third goes the way of James Dorlin to get ever closer to the championship. Fourth is Dino Zamparelli, another of the non-scoring guests. And then there's a bit of a wait, but the 5th car through, Andy, after a great drive, is going to be, there he is, the Am winner, and that's Ian Humphries.
Yeah, and he did all of this, really, in the first lap or so. By tagging along with the pro drivers, he was able to gain about 5 seconds on the rest of the Am field, and that gap really hasn't changed all race. So Ian Humphries then comes through to take his 2nd Am class victory of the season, and 2nd place will be Pete Chambers. Now, that battle for 3rd is, I think, going to go the way of Nigel Rice. Yes, it does, with Daniel O'Brien 4th, and Carl Cavers should come home in 5th position. Yes, he will, just ahead of the green car there of Mike Price. I was watching part of that race out of the window, David, though, and everyone had someone to battle with. We were focusing, quite rightly so, on that second, third and fourth place squabble, but really great racing. The biggest grid we've had all year. You don't need a big grid to have a good race, but that really was a great spectacle.
I agree, and I know I'm a bit biased because I love these cars. I think it's a great championship, but to launch a championship in a year like this, I mean, they didn't know what a year it was going to be, obviously, but when Porsche was confronted with all the dramas that COVID-19 has presented, to launch a championship and all the way through to have lots of new drivers, new teams coming into it. The grids have been building. It's been a tough season, of course, for the teams, for the drivers, and indeed for Porsche GB to reorganise a calendar. And for my money, it works well for the AMs because the cars are user-friendly. It works well for the young pro drivers, the silver graded drivers, if you like, that are thinking about a GT career but haven't perhaps got the money to go into a European platform or an international stage or the two-driver platform. But this, with support racing after contact and an incident, did for him. So let's see what he can do from the back of the grid in race 2. But Theo Edgerton then, a 5-second margin of victory. Very, very impressive drive indeed. Let's have a look at the highlights of the opening Cayman Islands Porsche Sprint Challenge GB race. Charles Clark went nowhere off the back of the grid. Others slithered away, some making better starts than others in these greasy conditions. But it was Dino Zamparelli that did steal the lead into turn 1, blocked everybody behind, and there was contact. Adam Knight being tapped sideways, slithering off across the road and ending up into the gravel trap. Ambrogio Perfetti given a helping hand around the lap as well. Was that Carl Cavers that got involved with him? Perfetti therefore had to pit, and the team going to work as out on track Mike Price was busy squabbling with Nigel Rice. Those two nose to tail as they came onto Wellington Straight. Daniel O'Brien battling with them. James Dorlin then not able to go after the race leader, but he was busy hanging on to second spot. Dino Zamparelli all over the back of him. But then, as Charlie Liddell became more confident in car and condition, so he started to make the move. Third on the inside, out of club corner, find the grip and moved ahead of Zamparelli. Lower down, Daniel O'Brien came up to have a go at Carl Cavers, moved himself through, and that was the 4th in class in the AMP category. Charlie Liddell then made his move for second place overall, picked off the place ahead of James Dorlin going through Abbey into Farm. But Theo Edgerton was way out in front, a winning margin of over 5 seconds. His first victory in the Porsche Sprint Challenge GB. Well done, Theo Edgerton. James Dorlin ever closer to the championship title that's going to be secured in race 2, which is due to come up later in the day, 11:10, all being well. For now, from Andy McEwen and David Addison, it's goodbye. We'll see you later.